If oil continues to be pumped from beneath the ground, but not a single ship can leave port, how much time does Tehran have before its entire economy collapses from within? The answer does not lie in empty political threats. It lies in a brutal physical number: 14 days. 14 days is not a slogan or a diplomatic warning. It is the worst-case scenario of a system running in reverse, not because Iran runs out of oil, but because its oil has nowhere left to go. When every storage facility hits its physical limit, pressure will force the entire extraction system to shut itself down to avoid a catastrophic pipeline rupture. And that is precisely why Washington decided to bring the Navy into the equation. The United States does not need to close the Strait of Hormuz. It is conducting something far more precise: a surgical operation. Using its fleet, it turns these waters into a selective choke mechanism, sealing Iran's exit while preserving the breathing space of the rest of the world, forcing Tehran's entire strategic rhythm out of sync. This video will show you why this blockade is surgical in nature, why the US Navy is the perfect instrument to execute it, and why the thing causing Iran's leadership the most pain right now is not missile fire or massive warships. The United States does not need to fire the first shot to disrupt Iran's strategy. It only needs to make Tehran's clock start running backward. Welcome to Navy Codex. Let's begin the decoding now. Financial sanctions on paper have one fatal weakness: they take time to bite, and there are always loopholes to exploit. For decades, Tehran has mastered the operation of shadow fleets, offshore oil transfers, and complex underground banking systems. Numbers on a screen in Washington can be obscured with code, but a 300,000-ton VLCC cannot. Look at this geographic reality. To sustain an economy on the brink, Iran's oil must move. It must transit routes, enter ports, and expose its journey. No anonymity system can conceal a 330-meter steel hull, the length of an aircraft carrier, as it moves through the narrow waters of Hormuz. The US Navy is not here to play financial hide-and-seek. It is here to convert risk from a paper possibility into a physical reality directly off the bow. The Navy does what sanctions cannot. It eliminates delay. When an oil tanker captain sees the looming silhouette of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer on the horizon, every calculation about circumvention yields to survival instinct. At that point, the blockade takes psychological effect even before any coercive action is executed. Maritime tracking data shows that the mere presence of a carrier strike group at the gateway of Hormuz immediately reduces the flow of suspicious vessels entering and leaving Iranian oil ports. That is not diplomacy, that is physical pressure. The United States does not deploy its Navy because it seeks a classic large-scale naval battle. It does so because the sea is the only domain where Washington can directly lock the adversary's commercial engine in real time, without waiting for consensus from international financial institutions. But remember, the US Navy is not just standing there observing. To enforce this surgical blockade in such a chaotic maritime environment, it brings a multi-layered combat ecosystem where each platform is a sharpened blade designed to sever every avenue of Tehran's resistance. So what specific blades is the US fleet using to maintain this suffocating pressure without firing a shot? We are about to dissect that firepower ecosystem next. To conduct a surgical blockade in one of the narrowest and most complex maritime zones on Earth, the US Navy does not bring isolated ships. It brings a symbiotic ecosystem. At Hormuz, power is no longer measured by displacement or the number of naval guns, as it was in the last century. It is measured by the connectivity of a multi-layered air-surface, subsurface network. At the top of this ecosystem's food chain stands the Carrier Strike Group, a floating center of power. Do not see it merely as an airport at sea. In this operation, it is a mobile data cloud. From here, early warning, electronic warfare, and air battle management are coordinated to ensure the entire fleet stays one step ahead of the adversary in battlefield awareness. But the direct arm tightening the noose is the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. Equipped with the Aegis combat system, the most powerful battle brain on the planet, these ships can simultaneously track hundreds of targets. From a sea-skimming cruise missile to an oil tanker deliberately trying to erase its traces from civilian radar. These are not merely escort ships. They are guardian sentinels, enforcing the blockade on the ground through interception algorithms accurate down to the millisecond. In the chaos of Hormuz, the real battle is a battle of perception. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye serves as the all-seeing eye above, classifying what is a harmless merchant vessel and what is a target to be locked. Beside it, the EA-18G Growler delivers the electronic nerve-cutting strike. It does not need to fire a shot to win. It paralyzes the adversary's radar and communications network, leaving Iran's fast boat tactics and drone swarms once sources of pride blind and disoriented before they can reach the fleet. However, the fleet does not only look to the sky. In the silent depths, MH-60R Seahawk helicopters continuously search for threats from sea mines and mini-submarines, Tehran's trump cards in shallow waters. And hidden deep inside the VLSLs are Tomahawk cruise missiles, an unspoken signal of deterrence. If the adversary chooses escalation, the US Navy does not merely hold the sea. It can strike deep into coastal command nodes within minutes. This is what observers often miss. America increases pressure not through the number of ships, but through a symbiotic ecosystem. When every link from sensor to shooter locks into place, they do not simply control the sea surface, they control how Hormuz is seen, turning the gray zone battlefield into a fully transparent space. But why does this transparent and overwhelming system make Iran's asymmetric tactics begin to face unprecedented obstacles? For decades, Iran's strategy at Hormuz rested on one core assumption: low cost can defeat high cost. They used dozens of cheap, fast boats to threaten billion-dollar warships. They used sea mines and the gray zone to create uncertainty. This wolf pack tactic is strongest only when the adversary hesitates. But in this operation, the US Navy brings something Tehran did not anticipate: an organized, coercive system that breaks the wolf pack's coordination at the molecular level. The strength of the IRGC wolf pack does not lie in the firepower of each individual boat, but in synchronized coordination. The United States breaks that with the electronic nerve-cutting strike from the EA-18G Growler. When frequency bands are jammed and communications networks are collapsed, the Wolfpack is no longer a coordinated force. It becomes a cluster of isolated individuals fumbling at sea. When they can no longer receive orders from the command center and can no longer see one another on radar, Iran's numerical advantage instantly becomes a logistical weakness. They are fully exposed to the US. Fleets remotely controlled firepower systems without any protection from the ambiguity they once relied on. Iran once succeeded in using mines and military warnings to generate fear that paralyzed international shipping. But this time, the US Navy has reclaimed control over the tempo. By enforcing a surgical blockade with steady discipline, Washington sends a message: uncertainty is no longer Tehran's exclusive weapon. When every Iranian escalation step is visible and can be locked down immediately, the psychological leverage of asymmetric warfare is officially broken. The greatest obstacle to Iran's strategy is not that America has more ships or heavier firepower. It is that America has transformed Hormuz from a dark zone, favorable to ambush, into a transparent arena where the hunter's trap has been fully exposed. And when the military cards no longer work, Tehran is forced to face an even more frightening reality. Oil mathematics begins to tighten. This is no longer a war of missiles, but a war of overflowing storage tanks. Why does excess oil become a death sentence for Iran? We will decode that paradox next. There is one thing amateur observers often misunderstand about a blockade. They think Iran will collapse because it lacks oil. But the reality at Hormuz is the exact opposite. Iran faces collapse because it has too much oil and no cubic meter left to store it. And the US Navy is the only entity capable of turning this dry logistics problem from theory into a ruthless ultimatum. Without the fleet's aggressive enforcement offshore, Tehran's storage problem remains only on paper. But when Aegis destroyers force shadow fleets to hesitate, divert, or stop entering port, the oil clock begins ticking faster than ever. Look at this physical chain of logic. When storage facilities at Karg Island or Bandar Abbas reach saturation, Tehran is pushed toward a painful decision point. It cannot keep pumping oil with nowhere for it to go. If it refuses to stop, pressure can damage the entire pipeline and technical infrastructure. Washington understands this. If the blockade holds long enough, Iran's own energy infrastructure will begin strangling its economy without a single bomb being dropped. This is the pinnacle of surgical blockade. The US Navy does not need to expend ammunition to destroy the adversary's energy capacity. It turns surplus itself into a weapon. When the final buffer disappears, Iran is forced to choose between two forms of death. Either accept shutting down its oil wells, an act that could leave a permanent scar on future production capacity through saltwater intrusion and reservoir damage, or step back before American demands. The United States has used its Navy to turn logistics into a weapon of mass economic destruction. And when suffocation no longer stops at the oil depots, a tsunami of shortages begins surging from the seaports deep into the interior, turning industrial machines into silent blocks of steel. So why does the United States not need to close the entire strait, yet can still place Iran's strategy under severe pressure? The answer lies in a shift in modern warfare thinking. America does not need to turn Hormuz into a battlefield of fire to win. Instead of using firepower to confront Iran's asymmetric spearheads directly, Washington has chosen a more refined option. It turns Tehran's own economic dependence into a self-operating trap. Look at how this multi-layered leverage suffocates the adversary. At sea, the US. Navy does not close the strait and provoke the international community. It conducts a surgical blockade precisely against Iran's commercial flow. This allows America to maintain the image of a guardian of maritime order in the eyes of the world, while completely isolating Tehran's lifeline. This is where Tehran's power structure reveals its fatal delay. Iran is strongest when it can use the uncertainty of the strait to threaten the world. But by keeping the rest of Hormuz open and locking only Iran's portion, America strips away that trump card. Tehran cannot drag the entire world into the conflict when the United States is acting as a controller of international maritime order. The greatest obstacle to Iran's strategy is not a glorious naval battle. It is that Iran has lost the right to define the tempo in its own waters. The United States has used its Navy to transform Hormuz from Iran's deterrence weapon into a reverse pressure machine against Tehran itself. Washington controls time, controls information, and controls the patience of major partners such as China and India. When every road leads to a logistics breaking point, Iran's leadership realizes that the trap they set for the world is now tightening around themselves. It would be a fatal strategic mistake to view the US Navy as an omnipotent force capable of controlling every cubic meter of water at Hormuz. The reality of the battle space is never a clean blueprint like in a laboratory. Behind the transparency of these domes of awareness lie enormous risks, where even a small miscalculation can overturn Washington's entire strategic game. The United States faces a needle in a haystack problem. How to distinguish an Iranian shadow tanker from thousands of neutral vessels exercising freedom of navigation. One mistaken shot, one interdiction that violates international law, could instantly destroy the legitimacy of the entire operation. It would transform America from a protector into an aggressor in the eyes of the international community. Precisely the scenario Tehran hopes for to reverse the diplomatic balance. Iran understands these limits well. It does not need to defeat the US fleet with firepower. It only needs to create enough chaos to destabilize the energy market. A single classic mine, costing a few $1,000s, if fortunate enough to break the keel of a supertanker, could send maritime insurance rates soaring and push US allies into panic. Finally, there is the internal equation. Maintaining a multi-layered blockade at 24/7's operational intensity is an immense burden on both platforms and personnel. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers have finite VLS capacity. Growlers and E-2Ds have strict flight hour maintenance limits. If Iran adopts a strategy of delay using small-scale harassment to burn down, the fleet's patience and reserves the blockading force itself may exhaust before the blockaded side collapses. This is why Hormuz is often called a volcano's mouth. It is not a place for impulsive actors. American restraint is not weakness. It is the recognition that in such a confined space, absolute power exists only when it is exercised with absolute discipline. After everything we've dissected, a stark truth emerges. In the Strait of Hormuz, superiority is not determined by displacement, not by the number of missile cells, nor by the size of the largest ships. In these narrow waters, brute force has reached its limits. So why does the United States use its Navy to apply pressure? The final answer does not lie in displays of muscle. It uses the Navy to turn the fleet into the final node of a ruthless economic and logistical equation. Washington does not win by sinking Iran's fleet. It wins when the adversary realizes that the oil clock and the patience of its society are running faster than any asymmetric war plan. The math is done, and the battlefield is set. But if you think this dominance is immutable, remember that Hormuz has another critical vulnerability. Waters as shallow as 39 meters, where even $3 billion nuclear submarines can become ineffective. Why do America's ocean monsters fear these waters more than torpedoes? We will decode that mystery in the next video.